Okay, first question. How do you pronounce your name? Is it Talia or Thalia?
Thank you so much for asking. It's Talia.
Talia. Okay, that's what I thought, but I was like, I have this bad habit of having people on the podcast, and then after the fact, I go to record my little introduction part, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know how to pronounce their name.
You got it perfectly. And I don't know if it's your Canadian accent that gets it correctly, but I don't know. You got it.
Yeah, maybe it's probably because we grow up with French.
Yeah,
So
okay.
that's very like a French thing, not like pronunciating the H, like Talia, you know? So
You can call me that with that pronunciation anytime.
like Talia, Talia. Yeah. Okay. I'm always curious how people became interested in their niche areas. So obviously your Instagram account, Family Snack Nutritionist, is very focused on pediatric nutrition. You're a dietitian, but well, first of all, how did you even get into the area of nutrition, just like in general?
I'll try to keep it as abridged as possible. My husband, who is now not my husband anymore, I was very, very, very young, and I decided that I wanted. He lived in America, so I decided I was going to go and study abroad so that we could be together. And I ended up doing a semester abroad at UCLA, and I took this class about diet and exercise, which I found incredibly fascinating. And I remember after my first day, I went home and I pulled out my laptop, and I'm like, what can I study that will have me studying this forever? Because it's so interesting. And I found this Master of Nutrition and Dietetics back home in Australia. I'm originally from Melbourne, and there's a program there at one of the universities that's very prestigious. It's a year and a half program. It has a ton of prerequisites, which is why it is so accelerated. And I'm like, I'm going to make it my mission to complete all the prerequisites in my undergrad so I can apply. And I did apply, and it was a very contentious issue because we were living back in us. We moved to Australia so I could finish my degree, but my wasband is what I've heard it called now,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
didn't want me to do this program. He wanted me to come back and live in America with him. And I'm like, I'm going to apply only at this one program because I've worked really hard to get into it. And if I don't get in, I will leave and come back with you. And I did get in, and it's a small program. And I was very excited that I got in. And it was like this whole thing. But I am so glad that I ended up doing it, because looking back and learning everything that I know now as someone in my 30s, I would have been so screwed in life if I hadn't done that.
Yeah.
So that's how I became a dietitian. And then the way I got to specialize in this was right after I finished my degree, I moved back to America because that's where he had gone while I was studying. And I couldn't find a job. I also was waiting for a green card. So I ended up doing a whole bunch of volunteering with the Red Cross and with a food pantry. We moved from LA to San Diego, so I was doing volunteer work there, and I made some really good connections. And then I was like, I really actually want to like work, and so I made some connections, and I like reached out to people via LinkedIn, and I found this lady who used to work at a community college, and she gave me a contact there, and I reached out, and I'm like, hey, I'd really love to like come in for an interview. And she was like, oh yeah, we happen to be hiring. Little did I know that they're almost always hiring for an adjunct. And so I started working there, and I worked there for a number of years. I had both my children while I was working there. Then when I had my second child and I was pregnant, tried to do the right thing by letting them know early that I was pregnant. And she lied on an evaluation, had me terminated. I had to fight for my
Oh.
job. I'm like 8.5 months pregnant, or 8 months pregnant at this point. They did give me my job back. I took some leave because I was like not in a very good mental headspace. And then I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, like postpartum, after my second baby was born. And after about 5 months of being home with her, or both of them, I was like, I don't know who I am anymore. So I went on Instagram, and I had a blog at the time, and I just thought like, oh, I'll just explore like what I can do online. And I ended up just posting like pictures of she was 2, my 2-year-old's plates, and just like talking about like a little bit about motherhood and mostly nutrition. And it ended up that a lot of people were asking questions about picky eaters and things that they were struggling.
Mm.
Their child wouldn't eat vegetables and things like that. And so I took a little online course about using Instagram for like business and reaching people. And from there, I was able to decide on the niche that I really wanted, which was helping mums, and particularly picky eating was like a big focus that I was really interested in. And it's just like grown over the years into like I originally just started on Instagram and I started on YouTube because I'm like, oh, I really do believe that people should have some free, like really good access to high quality information. And then I made an online course and now I have three of those. And during COVID, when my now ex-husband lost his job, we were like, well, I can do coaching or like counseling, which I never thought I would do because I was always the primary carer and never had more than 20 minutes to myself. And while he
Mm.
was home, I was like, can you take the kids for a few hours so that I can do this? And that ended up growing and growing. And now I do coaching and counseling, which is absolutely amazing. So that's how I got into it.
And how old are your kids now?
My oldest one's about to be 8, and my little one is
Okay.
5. So it's been
Okay.
like I started on Instagram when my littlest one was about 5.5 months old, right after I was diagnosed with postpartum depression. And
Oh my gosh.
I can't believe like their ages are the benchmark for me of how long I've been doing this. And there's like, I can't believe how old they are at this point.
Yeah. Well, Milo's 5, and I think about like, you forget because when I look back at old pictures and videos of him, I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, he was so little," and I totally forget, especially, like, the newborn phase or, like, baby phase. Yeah.
Whenever I'm in the area that I live in, there's a lot of young families, and like I was at a cafe the other day with my partner, and there was this cute little. She was probably 7 or 8 months old, and she had just learned to wave, and she was just waving, and I was just. She looked a little bit like my youngest daughter did at that age, and we were just waving at each other, and I just kind of turned around to my partner, and I'm like, I don't ever want another baby again. Like they're so wonderful, but they're also like there's so much work and like
It's a lot.
yeah, everybody who has kids knows this, and some I've noticed that some people are more built for the chaos of motherhood, and for me my two are perfect.
Mhm. Yeah. No, 100%. It's like anything else, like, some people thrive in certain situations or in certain, careers. Like, I look at what my husband does, I'm like, "I could never." And, like, it's the same like, we all love our kids, but even, like, different stages of kids, like the baby stage, the toddler stage, some people love having teenagers versus having little kids and vice versa, and everybody is so different, and it's just we're allowed to have opinions and feelings about motherhood, whereas before, I think it was kind of like you just had to love every moment, and if you said anything otherwise, it was like, "Oh, shame on you."
That's exactly like I when I came across your page, I really loved how candidly you spoke about how difficult the realities of motherhood are. And the more I have like kind of grown into my own person since leaving my marriage, I realized that a lot of people in our sort of age group that have young kids, we were sold this lie by society that this is the only way to have a good life is to be a mother and be married, which I disagree with now. And yeah, like I remember having a neighbor when I was still living in San Diego. Like I walked a lot with both my kids and our dog, and she would just, "Oh, you just loving motherhood," and I was just like, I was probably maybe 6 months into having my first baby at this point, and I was like, in my head, I'm like, I am not coping, I am not sleeping, I don't really have a very supportive husband. Like, I am not okay. And what can you say back to somebody who's like, how wonderful is motherhood? You can't say, it's really fucking hard. I'm not enjoying a lot of it. You
Yeah.
just can't say that. And I love that there are people like you who are out there talking about how you can't take a poop by yourself,
Yeah.
because that's the actual reality of motherhood. And I'm really curious to see what the next generation of women, if because a lot of them are deciding not to have children. And
Mhm.
I'm very curious to see, like, the ones that do pick to have children, are they going to be so much better informed and therefore less like bombarded with all the things that they didn't know were going to happen? Because now there are women like you who talk about it like very
Yeah.
bluntly.
It's almost like, people will have more clear like, they will know what to expect more so than just, like, being slapped in the face, you know?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I've got a friend couple who live near me, and they're similar age to me, but they don't have children, and they're both kind of like on the fence. And I was at their house for dinner, and I said, "Have you ever read a parenting book? Not a what to expect book, but like an actual book about parenting toddlers and children." And possibly even teenagers. That's the book you want to read, because as I've read a lot of those books, like since both my kids were born, I have read everything that I can digest about like gentle parenting and like
Mm,
co-regulating and all those sorts of things so that I can basically reparent myself. But that is the type of thing to read if you are not sure if you want to have a child or not. Because if you can read through those things and discuss them together, and like you're both on the same page and you're both supporting each other, then that's probably a good indication that you might have picked the right person to have children with, and that you might be a good person who wants to go through all of those things. If you read
mhm.
them and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to have to deal with what now? No. Like, that I
Yeah.
think is a really good way, because you don't get a sense of what it's like to hang out with somebody else's child for an hour or even a day.
No, 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 no. No, and your entire life shifts. So, a lot of it is, like, there's the parenting piece, which, like, there's an overwhelming amount of information when it comes to, like, our baby's health and parenting techniques and all that kind of stuff, but, like, what about motherhood things and, like, what happens to you as a person and how your life is affected and how your marriage is affected and, like, so on and so on, you know? How your hobbies are affected. You have no leisure time. Yeah, like, less focus on, like, let's parent the children as best as possible. Like, we have to be the absolute best, most perfect parents, and more so on, like, let's have some resources for the actual parents and for mothers, you know,
That's a really good point.
to have them be better prepared and have better supports.
That's
Yeah.
a really good point. I've got my best friend is staying with me at the moment, and they're married, happily married, and they have two children, and one of them is a higher needs child who was diagnosed with autism and has other things going on as well. And I asked her, we were talking last night, and we were talking about like how most of us would identify as, I'm either a mother or I do this for a work, a job. I'm a dietitian. That's what I am. And we were just kind of talking about like, but who are we if we take those things away? Because I've been reading a lot of books about like finances and like learning about personal finance. That's been my thing for the last 2 years since I've now been on my own. I'm like, I need to know how to do
Oof.
these things. And I've read a lot of books and I feel very informed. And one of the books was about retiring early, and they're talking about like, think about how you would spend your leisure time when you don't have to work. And I'm just like, oh, I really
What?
do need to doodle down some ideas here, because this is hard, because I do identify a lot of my who Talia is as a person is, I'm a mother and I'm a dietitian and I help other parents. Like that's me. I have some hobbies and I do some other things, but like that's the most of who I am. And that's a really interesting point of preparing parents, not just for the parenting role, that you basically don't exist as a person anymore unless you put a lot of
Yeah.
effort into that.
It's a lot of effort. Yeah. To maintain a life outside of being a mom and outside of, like, the family home, let's say. Okay, but let's get into picky eating because this is a hot topic and I'm sure it's very relatable to most people listening.
I'm excited.
What I was looking at some of your content on your Instagram page and there was something about, like, how to determine whether or not your kid is a picky eater. Like, I'm always curious cuz I think Milo's pretty good. at eating and trying different things, like, for the most part, but when I was, like, reading like, some of your content about picky eating, I'm like, like, I don't know if he would be considered a picky eater, so how do you even define that?
The way I like to define it after many years of working with parents who I've actually had calls with parents who they'll describe the things, for the most part, this doesn't happen very often, but they'll describe what their child eats. And really, the child is actually fine. I would say that's actually only happened once. But the things that I tell any parent to look out for, because the first part of helping your picky eater or selective eater is knowing if it's actually a problem or not. And the thing is, if you, first of all, if you only have one child, or if it is your first child, you might not know until you have a second child that your second child eats everything. And now you're like, oh, I didn't realize that this is not normal. I think every parent experiences this with some part of being a parent. Like, oh, I just didn't realize that that was not how it's supposed to be. I experienced that with my marriage. So I think a lot of people can relate to that. So, first thing is your child eating more than 20 foods? If they're eating close to 20 foods or less than 20 foods, that's a big red flag by itself. And I've got a video that's pinned to the top of my Instagram page about how to count the 20 foods, because like you can get into the nuances of like, well, they eat a potato chip, but they won't eat a mashed potato, or they will eat like a jacket potato, but not like a regular like baked potato. So does potato count as a food, or does that count if they eat them in the three different ways? So those count as separate foods. The way I would say to do it is write down everything that they will reliably eat. Just brain dump it all down and have a look. And if it's something like, because potatoes, they can be cooked in so many different ways and they have so many different textures. If there are 6 different ways that they accept potatoes, that's a good variety. If they only accept fried potatoes from McDonald's, that's very rigid. That's extremely rigid. When I start seeing kids that are quote brand specific about like they'll only eat a certain type of yogurt that's like a certain brand and a certain flavor, that's very rigid. And ideally we have a child who is very flexible, where you can buy, that yogurt wasn't available, so I bought this one, or I wanted to buy a different flavor, or we're buying plain yogurt and we're mixing things into it, and we're mixing different things into it. So write down all of those things, and like across the board, try to stay within the food groups. What I recommend is, like, a lot of parents who do have genuine selective, picky eaters, is that they'll eat a lot of like crinkly bag snacks, but they've got a lot of variety there. Like they'll eat like these crisps, or like eat these like monkey chips, or like whatever they are. So write those, all the snacky things and the like quote unquote dessert things, put those in a separate section, because they don't belong in a particular food group. So my next question is, do they eat a variety of foods from every food group? So if they're eating 3 vegetables, that's not a big variety. If they're eating 30 fruits, brilliant. That's great. There's probably a range of different textures that they're eating. That's the next question, because a lot of the parents that I work with have children that are neurodivergent, and textures, like some kids like truly gravitate towards crunchy things and they can't accept, like they'll gag, or they just can't accept being around, like even the thought of a banana would possibly cause them to vomit. So have a look as you're going through your food list. It's kind of a good thing to take note of. Is there a texture preference? Are they only eating soft things? Are they only eating crunchy things? And if they're only eating one or the other, if they're, generally speaking, when you write them down, they are eating a mix. Like some kids really like, they'll eat like soups and mushy things, but then they also like the crinkly bag snacks, which tend to be quite crispy and crunchy. So there's a good variety of textures there. So number of foods and variety from each food group. Those are the 2 main things. The next thing is, are you super stressed about what's happening at mealtimes? Are you finding mealtimes incredibly stressful? Because that's not normal either, to be worried. Like I've had some parents that by the time they get to me, they're like, mealtimes aren't a battle. I just make them whatever they want. So you might not be having a battle at mealtimes because you're just catering to them. So that's something to think about as well. Are you giving them a separate meal, or are you only giving them the things that they eat? Because I came across this video on TikTok that I stitched recently, where she's talking about how I think she's got 3 or 4 kids, and she's a very young mother. And she was talking about how I give them what they eat, otherwise they don't eat anything, and I need them to eat something, which comes from a good place. It comes from the place as a parent as, I don't want my child to starve, so I feed them something so that they eat. The problem, and it is important for children to eat, I am there are some pediatricians that are like, just let them go hungry and they'll eat when they're eventually hungry. That is terrible
Yeah.
advice. That's starve it out advice. That is terrible. That sets everybody up to fail. It sets you up to be very worried, and it sets you up to cave in and give them something because you're not a horrible person and you don't want your child to starve. So that is just
Right.
terrible advice all around.
In that situation, because I actually had this written down to ask you, because sometimes we find ourselves in that situation as well. And it gets to a point where it's like, okay, like we know he's going to eat cucumbers, peppers, and carrots and like certain, quote unquote, healthy things. So it's like, okay, finish all of that stuff and then we'll get you like your yogurt and whatever it might be. Like once I heard you describe picky eaters, like I think he might be a little bit of a picky eater, like a little bit. But, anyways, in that situation, what do you recommend parents do? Because we don't want our kids to be hungry, obviously.
Absolutely. It's we have to meet somewhere in the middle, and this is an important part of parenthood and in general, which is having respectful boundaries. And one of the things I've spoken about before is like over accommodating. So if you are making your child, let's say you've made curry and rice with like a side dish of, I don't know, green beans or something, and there's something reliable there, like your child eats rice, for example. So you've got something reliable. You have not set them up to fail by not having anything reliable at the meal. And I like to use the word reliable food instead of safe food, because like an unsafe food would be if you have a peanut allergy and you could die from being exposed
Poison.
to exactly. So when we label foods as like safe, we're then labeling all the other foods as unsafe, which can become like a self-fulfilling prophecy for a child. um so serving them, like having something reliable at the meal, but then if they say, oh, I don't want that, and you're so worried, like, oh, they're not going to eat anything, so I need to go and make them a PB&J. That is over accommodating. What you could do that would not be over accommodating would be saying something like, would you like to add like some tomato sauce, like ketchup or mustard or like ranch or something to this? Because that's easy to go get out of the fridge. It doesn't change the meal. It allows them to maybe find a way that they can add something small to the meal to make it more enjoyable for them. That's what I would recommend. Versus if you make them something that they cannot be successful with, well, like, it's just like starving them out. You are both going to fail. Like, you're not setting you or your child up to have a successful mealtime. You're setting yourself up to have a terrible mealtime, and no
Yeah.
one's going to enjoy it. They're going to be stressed and upset, and you're going to be stressed and upset. So that's not the way to go. But if you're only feeding them their safe, quote unquote, like safe and reliable foods, they're never going to be exposed to other foods that we want them to eat. Like, for example, with your son, we maybe you do want him to try peas, for example. But if you never put peas in front of him, he's never going to have the opportunity to see them, to feel them, to touch them, to explore them. There's a lot of there's a lot of stuff that happens. Like, eating is a very complex thing. We've got to you look at the food, you smell the food, you have your own preconceived ideas about the food. I've got a good example for that if I remember to come back to it in a second. But not just giving them the things that they will eat reliably, because in the end, yes, they're eating. That's the short term. Like, my child will eat, great, but then you're going to be stuck in that for the next 10 years, and your child's only going to be eating
Yeah.
5 or 6 things, or 5 or 6 meals, like a PB&J, which is nutritious. It's not nutritious to eat the same thing every day all the time. It's kind of like a
Mm.
lot of my picky eaters will start where they're drinking like so much milk. They might be drinking 30 ounces of milk, or like Pediasure. I was working with one mum who, her daughter was really struggling to gain weight, and she really wasn't eating very much food. She would like frequently skip meals. If your child is skipping more than a couple of meals in a week, that's not normal. So this child was constantly skipping meals. She was drinking like 35 ounces of Pediasure a day. It's no wonder that a child who's drinking that much milk, they have no appetite. And if your child is drinking that much milk over the course of the day, she was drinking it 5 times a day. You wouldn't feed your child spaghetti and meatballs 5 times a day, or a PB&J
Mhm.
5 times a day. Like, variety is really important. So like
Mm.
those are some main things to consider. But if your child is very, very rigid and you're afraid to serve them Hungry Jack's fries because there's no McDonald's around and they're going to have a fit and not eat, that's very rigid. And that is not, quote unquote, normal behavior. So two things that I wanted to quickly go to. So we as adults cater to our own pickiness, and I was talking to a client about this yesterday, where he was telling me that it's always really nice to have the dads on the phone because they have a very different experience, and they tend to be more of the parents that put pressure on their children to eat. And in this case, that was the case. And last time I had a session with mum, and we were talking about making a tofu dish to try. And dad, when he was literally on the phone with me, and he said, "Oh, my wife brought tofu home. Oh God, I'm not eating that." And I was like, "Okay, let's like dig into this a little bit more. Explain this to me, because that's exactly what your son says about chicken, and that's what you say you don't
Yeah.
understand. Like, because you love chicken, you can't understand this." So we as adults have these preconceived ideas about things, and within maybe a 7 or 8 minute conversation. I'm a big fan of looking at the stages of change. If you're not familiar with it, there's a really great like, you can see it online, but there's 5 stages in the stages of change. And to get into the action stage, which is the stage where you're actually doing the thing, like in this case, the dad trying the tofu would be the action stage. There's 3 stages that you have to go through before that. And in the 7 minute conversation I had with him, we were able to move him from, he basically wasn't even in pre-contemplation, but we moved him through all 3 of those, and he was like, "I will try the tofu, and I will be open to it. And I will talk to my son about it before we try it, about how this is new to me." Because the thing is, if you are a sort of selective eater yourself, or there are certain things that you really don't like, you you understand your child. You do. You just often don't realize that you do. And if that's how
Hmm.
you feel, I often give an example of a slug. Imagine if I invited you to my house to eat slugs. You'd probably be like, "That's gross." I've only had
No,
like 1 or 2
thanks.
people that are like, "I will do that." Most people are like, "Absolutely not. I'm not okay with that." And after a conversation where I could tell you, like, I house the slugs, and I have this special way that I euthanize them. And then, the way I cook them is this. And like, I love to have them with garlic and butter and this and that. And if it was all the things that would really appeal to you, maybe after a 5 minute conversation, you might be like, "I'd be willing to try one." I've moved you through the stages of change to the point where you're at the action stage. But initially, you were completely grossed out, and that's how your child feels about, say, a cucumber, or eating rice with pasta, or like rice with any kind of sauce mixed into it. So we do understand the child, and we cater around our own pickiness, but we expect a child who does not have a fully developed brain to just be open to trying random things.
That's very interesting. And it's funny because I always flip things like that when I think about Milo. Like, maybe we're having a bad bedtime, and I'm like, yeah, well, I'm 39 years old, and sometimes I can't fall asleep and it sucks, but I have the wherewithal to like stay in bed and not go wake up my husband because I can't sleep, but he doesn't. Like, I always put myself in his shoes, but I've never thought of it with regard to trying foods, but that is amazing. And I love that example because you're so right. So how do I think a lot of parents, and I always assume a lot of parents when it's something that we do without really thinking much about it. I know that you should be putting foods in front of them, like you were saying, exposing them to foods regularly. Like, I remember when Milo was a lot younger, we would always just like put food in front of him, even if we were like, he's not going to eat it, like that's in the back of our minds. But one day he fucking ate it.
Yeah.
Like, out of nowhere. And we were like, is he eating broccoli right now? Like, and he is. Like, we had tacos the other night, and normally that's not really something that he would eat. And like, my husband was like, psh, psh, like, look over here, like, look. And I looked, and Milo's like eating his little taco. And I will say one thing that I think has really helped him is his preschool that he went to. They took care of lunches. So he was always being offered different things in his daycare and seeing all the other kids eating. And then it's the same with his school right now. They do lunches, like we pay into the meal plan, and they have a chef at the school that makes them different meals every day for lunch. So he's trying all different things in a different environment because there's a bunch of kids around him that are also trying those things. But when it comes to mealtime at home, I think a lot of parents probably like my husband and I like eating different things. Like Indian food is like some of our favorite food. We also eat out a lot. And so it's hard for us and sometimes we could definitely do better at making sure that he's also being exposed to those things. So if a parent knows, like let's use the curry and the rice as an example, should we be like making a little bowl for our kids and just putting it in front of them?
A great question. And I have so many tips for and it really also depends on the child. So, and I say this to every parent that I work with because I also run a small coaching group. And every parent in the group, it's really nice because we foster community. And a lot of the parents can, like, oh, my child does that, or mine used to do that. I completely get that. And everyone, but what it also highlights is that every kid starts in a different place. Where some kids, if you put a bowl of something in front of them, I'm talking in this situation, I'm going to talk about non neurodivergent children.
Yeah.
That would, because that's a completely different thing if we're talking about a neurodivergent child. But there are some kids that are neurotypical that if you put something new in front of them, like if you put the curry in front of them, for example, they might throw it. And depending on what their reaction is going to be, like, you know, you are the expert in your child. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, if I put a little bowl of curry in front of my child, they would scream and run out of the room, or they would throw it at me, or they would dump it upside down and scream. So depending where you're starting is an important thing to note as well. And if a child, like some kids will accept a little bit of curry in a on their plate on the side and they won't mind, they'll just ignore it, but other kids will, like, they will not accept that. So first of all, think about where your child would start and then go from there. If your child, if you think they would easily accept it on their plate, put it on their plate. If you are unsure that they will accept it on their plate, putting it on a small side plate might be a better way of doing it. Another thing that can be really helpful is having your child come to the kitchen, or if you're doing it family style, have them plate for themselves so that they can be in control of how much and where they put it. I don't want it on this side. I don't want it near my cucumbers. I don't want it near my yogurt. I want it somewhere else. Okay. And I only want this much. Okay. So they can be in control of that. The next thing to consider is what are we giving them that is also reliable? There are so many things to think about as well. If depending on how severe your child's response is going to be, it can be very helpful to talk about it beforehand, which is what I'm calling an early exposure, meaning that maybe you talk to them about it in the morning. So your example with the lunches and stuff at school, they're brilliant because there's a little bit of peer pressure from the kids that they see all the other kids eating the same thing. And the other thing is that because you're at a preschool or a daycare or school, the teachers are not sitting there like we are at home. Mila, why haven't you eaten this? Why haven't you eaten your green beans? I've seen that you haven't eaten this. They're not saying all of those things because most parents, I've not spoken to a parent on the phone that does not pressure their child to eat in some way, shape, or form. And pressure can be sneaky. It's not just try a bite, or you need to eat that, or you can't leave the table until you've tried it. Those are like very overt forms of pressure. But things like have a lick for mummy, or you'll make mummy happy if you try this, or I've worked really hard and you're not eating it. That's pressure as well. Imagine going out to dinner with your spouse and they're saying those things to you. I'm paying for this meal and what do you mean you're not going to try it? Like, that's
Mm.
horrible. Like, so put yourself in your child's situation when you're saying some of those things. Think about how you would feel if your partner or somebody that you loved said that to you. It wouldn't feel really nice, and we're all guilty of it. And it's not that you have to be feeling ashamed that you've done that. It's just identify it and change it. That's the important thing. There's no sense in.
What about what are your thoughts on and like we like when he was younger it was like, oh, like Spider-Man eats broccoli, like things like that or now like I'm trying to explain to him for example if we make fish or salmon, which he's really good at eating those things as opposed to like a chicken breast or something. Like it's really weird. He's good with like salmon and fish, but I'll say like, "Oh, it's really good for your muscles or like to run fast because you're getting protein." Like is that pressuring?
I would say that's definitely
somewhat.
dipping a toe in the pool of pressure. and and
Right, right.
and here's the thing. Any parent who's listening to this, and you might be saying, "Oh, yeah, I say that you're going to be strong like Spider-Man." That Think about why you're saying that. Are you saying that
Mm,
because you are trying to coerce your child into doing something that they don't want to do? If you can, and be the person who can identify that, if that's what you're doing, then you are pressuring them. If you're simply doing it as a way of like, let's say like if it's Milo and he loves Spider-Man, you could say something like, "Do you think Spider-Man could eat the chicken if he was upside down? I don't know if I want to try that, but maybe if I have my head sideways like this and I can eat it, maybe I can practice being a little bit like Spider-Man." In that case, what, like me, as I'm acting this out, I'm like, I'm just curious. Like, do you think he could? Do you think Spider-Man could eat it upside down? Do you think, like, asking a question like that shows that you're curious? You care about the child's answer. It's not just eat this so that you can be big like Spider-Man, or eat this so that you can be muscly like Spider-Man. And so examine why you feel compelled to say those things. And putting the food on the plate, for example, like let's say it's peas and you put like 3 peas on the plate. If you put the peas on the plate, that is an exposure. Brilliant. Tick that off. Well done for doing that. There's so much more that you can do. I talk a lot about communicating and the way we communicate with our kids at meals and around meals and with food. And that comes down to like what I mentioned earlier about talking in an early exposure about, we're going to have this tonight for dinner. Do you think you're going to want yours in a bowl or on a plate, like the curry? Would you like, what do you think? So
mm.
that they're at least thinking about, oh, okay, curry. Oh, I don't know how I feel about that. They might get out some of their feelings then, but you're also doing it at a time where they're not. If you think about this, if you came over to my house and I didn't tell you what we were having for dinner, and you came over, you're hungry, it's the end of the day, it's dinner time, hard time for a child, and you come over and I'm serving you a huge smorgasbord of slugs cooked in 6 different ways, you'd be like, what the fuck is this? I didn't sign up for this. I
Yeah.
didn't want this. I'm hungry. I can't eat that. And now you're panicked because not only do you not want to eat that, you feel like you're going to be rude to me, and you're going to feel like you probably have to try it. And remember, you're an adult with a fully formed brain who can say no, and you know that you can advocate for yourself, and I'm not going to force you to try it. I'm not going to sit down with you and say, do you want to be big and strong like Spider-Man? You have to eat these slugs if you're going to be big and strong. That is a
Hmm.
terrifying situation for a child. So it is important to put your child in that situation. So the early exposure and communicating with them early, troubleshooting things early, coming up with a plan early, and like early in the day, is really, really helpful. So I'm trying to remember what your original question was because I've gotten off topic.
Um, just if that was pressure, like about the Spider-Man thing. But I have a new question that is very like, this is how I like to run this podcast. I just have experts on and I ask them my own personal question. So this happens a lot with us, okay? And I don't know if it's like the time of day or what, but Milo gets home from school. Usually he's left from his lunch. Like we send him just with little snacks. So we always give him like veggies, fruits, maybe like a yogurt and a granola bar. So he always will eat like the yogurt and the granola bar, but sometimes he has leftover the fruits and the veggies. So after school, that'll be his snack. So he'll have that. And then dinner time rolls around. And let's say it's something that we know that it's a reliable food. Let's say it's like noodles with pasta sauce. And he'll like pick at it a little bit. And then it gets to be closer to bath time, bedtime. And then he expects his like big snack plate before bed. But for me, I'm like, I get frustrated because I'm like, you didn't eat a lot of your dinner and now it's before bed and you want to have your cantaloupe and your, you know, whatever he's having. He likes his snack plates before bed. It can be like whatever, kielbasa, like cheese, whatever. So how do you approach that with a 5-year-old? Like it's like, am I explaining? Because I've said it a few times, but I don't know if he gets it. Because I'm like, you're not eating your dinner and then you want all your snacks before bed. But then what do I do? Like re-warm up dinner before bed and be like, if you're hungry, you're going to eat this. Like I never know how to handle that situation.
I've doodled it down so that I don't get distracted. Okay, I want to
Okay.
backtrack. I want because otherwise I'll forget. Okay, so the leftovers from lunch. I think this is excellent. And what you can do also is you can almost like repackage it, like rebrand it, because my second child is a more selective eater as well, and she very well. I've said this from when she was about a year and a half to 2 years old. She could have been the kid that just survived on bread, cheese, and fruit. So it is like some children are like, if you're listening to this and you're like, I wish my kid would like eat some fruit, because there are some kids that don't eat any fruit. So just know that there is uh, part of picky eating is a hereditable trait, and I don't want you to think about that as there's nowhere to go from here. In the same way that you can be prone to getting heart disease or type 2 diabetes, it means that if you manage your risk factors in a clever way and you exercise regularly, like you move your body and you eat plenty of fibrous foods, you're much less likely to have those issues. In the same way, changing your communication and figuring out how to expose your child often to new foods means that you are managing those factors and you are not going to shoehorn them by only catering to them. You are going to shoehorn them into being this picky eater, which we don't want. Okay,
Mm,
so the after school snack. The point was is my daughter will often come home with like, her cucumber is not eaten or the carrot stick is not eaten, and I always bring a small snack to pick up after school because it's necessary in my family.
me too.
And what I will do is I go through the lunchbox as I'm loading them into the car, and I pull out anything that is left in there that is still like, if it's all smushed and not edible kind of thing, I won't put it in the snack box, but I'll add that in because that's a really good opportunity to put something that was disliked, and you're rebranding it, you are repackaging it with something new. That's a really good thing to do. Don't just throw it out, or add it into dinner, or do something with it if you can salvage it, because food waste is a real thing, and spending money on vegetables that go in the compost bin is a real thing. So find a way to rebrand it and repackage it in the afternoon if you can, or put it with dinner. The second thing is if he's picking at dinner and you can see that he hasn't filled himself up. Generally speaking, I'm going to combine this answer with the snack before bed example. Depending what time your child has dinner and what time they go to bed determines if they need a PM snack. And for most kids, they don't, because I'll just use my family's dinner and bedtime as an example. We usually have dinner around 5:30, which goes till about 6, and then my little one goes to bed around 7, and the big one starts her bedtime routine around like 7:15, and she is lights out. I'm out of her room by 8 o'clock. There's no need to have a snack in that time. If they were going to bed at 9 or 9:30 and still having dinner at 5:30, that's when, if the window is 2 hours or more, that's where I would say, okay, you might need to put something in there. But if it's close to bedtime, you don't need a PM snack. And what you're going to do with that, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, because now he knows, no, I don't really want to eat that, and I know I'm going to get a snack later, so I'm just not going to eat anything.
Yeah. Yeah. He's playing us because you know what? Like we have dinner like sometimes even closer to 6 o'clock and he's in bed at 8 o'clock.
So there's no need to have, like, in your schedule, there is no need to have the snack. So if you are my client, and I have a client that's starting today that I was reading her intake forms, and she does not have a snack schedule or a meal schedule. That is really important. And if you're listening to me going, oh my God, we don't eat on a schedule, what if they get hungry and they say that they're hungry and we need to feed them? It's a respectful meal and snack schedule. We are not having them 3 meals a day. We are not saying that you need to go 5 hours between meals and snacks. No, it's the time between meals and snacks that's important, and aim for somewhere between 2 and 3 hours between each meal and snack opportunity. Okay, no one's saying feed them breakfast at 7 a.m. and then don't feed them again till lunchtime. That's ridiculous and stupid. I would not say that. So, but it is important to have a predictable schedule. And if your child, so in this example with Milo, he needs to know that you are removing the after dinner snack. You need to talk to him about that before you do it. Otherwise, he'll be super pissed off. He'll probably be pissed off anyway. But at least, again, like imagine if you drink your morning coffee and one morning you wake up and your spouse is like, I've decided coffee's bad. I've thrown it out. We're not having coffee anymore.
Oh, dead. Divorce.
Divorce immediately. That would be very different than if your spouse talked to you a couple of days before and said, hey, look, I've read some research and I really want to I want to start my day with a morning walk and I don't really want to drink coffee in the morning. Do you think that you and I could do this together for a few weeks and see how we feel, like if we can tag each other out and go for a 10-minute walk to wake up that way rather than have a coffee and see how we go. That's very different than I wake up, no coffee, I'm really pissed off. So you need to talk to the child before you make a big change like that. And big thing, you're not asking them permission. You are the adult, you are the leader, you're the
Mm.
parent, you're the leader. It's your job to lead. It's not your job to ask for permission. That's permissive. And of course, your child is going to say, I don't want to do that, because change is hard. We talked about the stages of change. Change is hard. It's hard for adults. So you've got to be prepared that your child will be angry and they will scream and they will have a meltdown the first few nights. Oh, I want my snack. Your job is not to fix that. Your job is to be there. Like, think about the last time you were really upset and crying about something. You don't want your husband or your wife or whomever to come in and be like, Thalia, stop crying. I'll take you out for dinner and we'll go get ice cream. That's not going to fix whatever I'm struggling with at the moment. If I'm having like an existential crisis about my divorce not being finalized for almost 3 years, like, that's not going to fix my issue. And instead it shows that that person is not comfortable with my feelings and that they want me to stop. And that makes me
Mm.
even more upset because I don't feel like anyone understands me.
Okay, so quick question. So let's say we put that boundary in place, and even with his dinner, maybe we give a little bit of what we would typically give in his bedtime snack so that it's there. Okay, just to like ease into it. Then it's 7:45. We're watching Puppy Dog Pals or whatever it is. And he's like, I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Can you get me grapes? Now what?
You need to be okay. There's a point where you can be flexible. And I'm saying, like, let's say you've stayed up really late because you've done a movie or something like that. And it's like later than their normal bedtime. And if you're just doing this for the first, like, let's say this is the first couple of days, you can be a tiny bit lenient. But if you continue to be really lenient, you will never actually reach the goal of removing that snack, because the neurons that fire together wire together. I asked for a snack. They gave me a snack. I'm going to keep asking for a snack. At some point, and I generally do recommend that you go into it not saying, I'm going to give a snack. And you have the chat with your child, like about the coffee, right? You're going to talk to your child. Hey, mum and I, dad and I, we've decided we're, instead of doing a snack before bed, which we don't really need to do that. We're going to have some of what we would normally have with snack at dinner, so that you don't feel like you're missing out on it. And you can even give them a choice. Like, I was thinking we could do like either like some cantaloupe or some of that sausage or whatever it is that you would normally put on that plate. Which of those would you like with dinner? We're having curry tonight. Like, which of those would you like? So you can give them some agency and some control. We don't want them to feel powerless, but we also don't want them to feel like they are running the show, because they are not running the show. That's a scary place for a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old to have all the power. You need to be the boundaries for them. And when they hit a boundary, they will be upset. It's your job to just be there and let them know that it's okay that they're upset. You can't fix it. You can't fix everything in life, but you can help them just get through it. I know this is hard. You can tell me how much you really dislike this.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to like make a plan and figure that out, because I get frustrated like internally, but then I'm just like, oh, like I don't want to deal with it. Cause as you know, like at the end of the day, like I have very little capacity to like, I just don't want to bother. But if we go in with a plan, I think that'll make it a lot easier to like get it going. I'm just curious, what are your favorite things to give kids for breakfast?
All right, hang on. Before I answer that question,
Okay, yeah.
with the like the snack and like the issue, like, because when I talk to a parent about like removing that PM snack, I ask them, okay, what's your biggest concern about that? And your biggest concern is he's going to ask for a snack because he hasn't eaten his dinner and he's going to be hungry. So we need to go back to prevent that from happening, which means adding something from the snack plate to dinner to make it enticing for him to be there. And it gives him more than one, like, let's say if he was only going to eat the rice from the curry, if you've now given him like a fruit and maybe like something else that he can mix into the rice, he's going to have something more substantial in his belly. So the point is, we're not trying to change something to make your life shit and then have your child have a meltdown over it. By talking to them early, we make a plan with them too. That means that we need to have enough to eat at dinner time because we're not going to have that snack now. So you need to make sure that you are satisfied that you've had enough at dinner time. And I don't know when you've had enough because nobody knows when you've had enough. Only you know what's in your body and only you know what your body feels like. So I trust you. If you tell me that you're all done, I trust that you're all done. And then if they say that they're all done after they've hardly eaten anything, that's when you might want to say something like, don't question their reality. If they're telling you they know that they're done, don't ask, are you sure? That's my biggest, like, not my biggest, it's one of my things. Like, if they're telling you that, just say, oh, okay. I noticed that you had like a couple of chicken nuggets. I know that when I only eat a couple of chicken nuggets, I am not full. But if you are done, that's okay. Just remember, we're making a big change tonight. Do you remember what the change is? Have them say it back to you. That's right, we're not having a snack tonight. Okay. And what's going to happen if you ask me for a snack at bedtime? I'm going to say, I know we normally do that, and this is hard. It's a big change. We're not doing that tonight. We're going to try this for, it's okay to say we're going to give this a try for 2 weeks, because that gives you a nice period where it's not like we're changing this forever and there's nothing you can do about it. Instead, it shows that you are working together, and 2 weeks is an excellent amount of time. If you are being consistent every day, you will have broken the habit by that time. But you're also letting them know, like, we're going to see how this goes. And you can take feedback every night. Oh, this is hard today, isn't it? It will be a bit easier tomorrow. So you're just validating what they're experiencing. So for breakfast, and I want to...
I just want to say one thing. It can seem daunting to set boundaries. And when you were talking about dealing with this situation, it reminded me of him not wanting to go to swimming lessons. And like, for some reason, like, something came over me and I was just like, this is a boundary. Like, we are going to swimming, because I guess I'm just like anxious about water safety and stuff. So it was easy for me to set that boundary. And like, a couple times we had to physically put him in the car and strap him in, like, you're going. And since he realized that, like, this is happening, it's not even a question anymore about going to swimming. It's just like, okay, we'll have swimming tonight. Like, once you get through that hurdle, it's so much better.
And that's the thing. You as a parent have to decide, where are your hard lines? Like, for example, like, I get a lot of parents saying like, oh, why can't my child walk around and eat? And for me, and again, everybody is different. For me, and for most of the parents I speak to, when I ask them, do you want your child to be walking around while they're eating, or do you want them to be at the table? 95% say I want them to be at the table. So if we allow that to lapse and allow them to like take crumbs all over the house, we are betraying ourselves, because we're not holding a boundary, and we're going to resent our child because there's fucking crumbs everywhere and there's going to be ants and stuff. It's okay to say, we eat dinner at the table, and it's important that you stay at the table. And if you're finished, you can leave the table and you can take your plate away, but that shows that you're done. So you've got to pick the things, and what's different to you, like what's important to you and what's your value is going to be different. But just remember, like, you have to be okay with honoring yourself. If you've, like, for swimming lessons, if you've paid for swimming lessons and your child is not sick, that they're just having like, I don't know, Monday-itis is what I've been calling it with my kids. Like, it's like, you can talk to them, you talk through that. I know, like, it's really hard after a long weekend to go back to school. Like, you just validate the feelings, but it doesn't mean I'm keeping you home. I'm not saying, oh, it's really hard to go to school today, you can just stay home. No, it's really hard to go to school, and I will be there to support you. I know you don't feel like going to swim lessons today. I will be there to support you. And I bet after you've done your swim lesson, there'll be one thing that you can tell me about that you did enjoy. You might be like, oh, I kind of enjoyed when the teacher did this. And you're like, so you can help them through it. And it's the same with this snack and the dinner thing.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a good conversation. Before I let you go, though, I'm just curious about breakfast, because again, like, this is just something that I'm dealing with. Like, what are your go-tos? Like, he likes boiled eggs, but I always find like we're giving him things that contain a lot of sugar, which bothers me because I'm on like a protein thing, and like, I'm trying to get a lot of protein, so it makes me think about what he's eating in the morning, especially. What are your recommendations?
if you take nothing else away from this podcast episode, instead of worrying about protein for your child, do you know where I'm going?
No.
Focus on iron foods, foods that contain iron, because iron deficiency anemia is the most common nutrient deficiency in children. And most children do not struggle to get enough protein. The amount of protein that a toddler needs, it depends on their weight. But if we're talking like a 25, 30-pound toddler, we're talking like 15-ish grams of protein. That is not hard to get. Like if you look up look up what 2 scoops of peanut butter is, 2 spoonfuls of peanut butter, it's probably half of that requirement. If they're eating half a cup of Greek yogurt, they're probably getting a third of their requirements right then and there. It's not hard for a child to meet their protein requirements. If you focus on iron instead, and you don't go around counting milligrams and all that sort of stuff, just like I've got this in one of my courses as well, a list of all of the high iron foods. Print it out and put it on your fridge, and make sure at every single meal and snack opportunity that you are giving something with iron in it. It's okay if they don't eat it, but if it's not there, they don't have the opportunity to eat it. And
What's like, I'm trying to think of iron, and I'm thinking like steak, like, but spinach. Like, what are the big iron foods?
so there's some in plant-based foods, and there's some in animal-based foods. The animal-based foods tend to be more what's called bioavailable, meaning that your body is more able to absorb them. Your body can't absorb 100% of the iron from anything, even if it is steak. But you're right, red meat, dark meat, poultry. If you're in Australia like me, kangaroo is a great source of iron. I know.
People eat kangaroos?
They do. They're a very lean red meat. They're actually, yes.
Oh my God, I'm shocked.
Yeah, you can get, like, I buy the kangaroo sizzle steak. And it cooks, it's so quick, it's so thin. It cooks in like 30 seconds each side, and my kids actually love it. So,
oh my God. But do they sell that like in the States or in Canada? No.
I remember when I was living in San Diego, you could go to a specialty butcher where you could get like kangaroo and ostrich, but I never saw it at a regular supermarket in the States, no.
Do you guys eat koala bears?
No, and they're not bears.
Oh, okay. What are they? What are they?
They're marsupials.
Oh, okay. Well then.
Okay, so the red meat, dark poultry, eggs, tofu. So if we're getting more into like the planty ones, tofu, edamame, dark green leafy vegetables. I've got like there's I'm trying to think of some other ones just off the top of my head. Legumes, nuts, seeds, chickpeas, chia seeds are a really good one. They're so easy. Chia seeds to add to a breakfast. You can mix them into yogurt, mix them into oatmeal, put them in a smoothie, freeze the smoothie into a popsicle. There are so many things that you can do, like nut butters to add. And all of those, every food that contains iron contains protein. Like every food that I just listed there has iron and protein in it. So if you're worried about protein, focus on iron, and you will also be focusing on protein. But not every protein food has iron in it.
Oh, okay. This is good. I like this. Okay, before I let you go, can you just tell us where people can find you online and your courses, like anything that you have, your YouTube channel, so that they can find you?
I'm everywhere as Family Snack Nutritionist, and I'm on YouTube. Yes, I've got a lot of videos, like longer form, like coaching style videos on there. Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook as well. And you can always reach out to me in a DM. If you're listening to this and you want to reach out to me, just let me know that you came from the podcast. It's such a beautiful thing. Sometimes someone will message me 2 years later and be like, I just was listened to you on this podcast. I'm like, oh, that's so nice. So that's where you can find me. You can always send me a DM. My website is The Plum Pantry, like plum, like the fruit, pantry.com. My online courses are on there. I've got one, Mealtimes Without Meltdowns, is the bread and butter, which is for a child that's over 12 months old who's a picky eater. Stress-free sweets and eats is if you are struggling with a child who is fixated on sweets. And if you are listening and you're like, oh, yes, that's my child, ask yourself, are they also a picky eater? Because chances are, I'd say 85% of the time, a child who is fixated on sweets is also a selective eater. And that's often because sweets are they're prepackaged, they're very reliable, they're very consistent, they are sweet and highly palatable, and your child is going to gravitate towards those things over a carrot that each carrot or each blueberry can taste wildly different and look wildly different. So you've got to address the underlying issue, which is the picky eating, at the same time as the focus and fixation on sweets, because you can't fix one without fixing the other. And I know we're getting a tiny bit off topic really quickly, that serving the sweet food at the same time as the meal, like on the same plate, helps to make it just another food. And it also means that your child isn't eating their entire dinner and then squeezing in a dessert at the end, which means that they're overeating, which we also don't want them to do. Or you're bribing them, you can have that once you have this, because that, like, studies show that makes the dessert thing that you're bribing with to the child more ingrained as being the great thing. Oh, I have to get through these disgusting carrots and I get this amazing prize. No, we don't. Like, let's set our kids up to just that, like, the chocolate is just a food that goes on the plate with everything else. So yeah, those are the courses. I also have a baby course that once I started coaching families, a lot of them would say, gosh, I wish I knew these things when my child was a baby, because then I wouldn't be in this situation now. So I've got a course for the first year of life for under 12 months, for not just how to, like, it's not, you can start solids through purees or through baby-led weaning. The course is for both, but it helps you set up responsive feeding right from the start, and so that you can see what your child is doing and what they're trying to tell you. If they're clamping their mouth shut, what that means, and whether you're spoon feeding or they're doing it themselves. It's for both of those, because the best way to feed your child and introduce solids is the way that you are not anxious about it. That's the most important thing. It goes through allergies and how to introduce foods, and you don't need to do them in any particular order, but also like setting up those good communication skills right when baby is a baby, because babies, even at 6, 7, 8 months old, they are understanding a lot of what we're saying. They can't respond, and most of the time they won't actually respond until they're a little bit older, but that doesn't mean they don't understand. So the way you speak at meal times and that you talk about the food and you set up boundaries, like, you need to keep the food on the plate or on the tray, not all over the floor. I once had a client argue with me over that. Not, well, she wasn't a client, she was someone on Instagram. That makes more sense. Oh, my child's learning about gravity, so they're allowed to throw their food. I'm like, no, they can learn about gravity in other ways, and you need to teach them what you want, which is to keep the food on their plate and to put it in their mouth and to let you know when they're done. It's like not okay to be throwing the food. They need to learn, again, through a respectful way, of how do we keep the food on the table? How can we be successful with that? Because you can, and babies do understand a lot, way more than we give them credit for.
I feel like it's cute the first time they throw food on the floor, and then it's like, okay, like this is not cute anymore.
Exactly. And like, it's
Yeah.
such an easy thing. Like the baby course is called Fuss Free First Foods, and and I've got a video on YouTube about food throwing as well, but how to do it in a positive way where don't scream at your child and don't tell them don't do that, because that's going to make them do it. It's instead, tell them what you want them to do. Please keep the food on your plate. Please put the food in your mouth. And then if they throw it again, it might be that you say, okay, that tells me that you're done. I'm going to take you out of your chair now and wash you up. It's not a punishment. It's just, this is the natural consequence of what happens.
Right. Yeah. Like if you throw food at a restaurant, they're going to escort you out. And that's just how life works.
Exactly. That is a natural consequence.
Yeah. This was such an amazing conversation. I'm so happy we made it work with the time change, Australia and Canada. Guys, it was difficult, but we did it. We did it.
Thank you for being so flexible.
Of course. Yeah. After my 5-hour drive in the rain, I was like, oh my God, I feel dizzy. Like windshield wipers just like this for 5 hours. I was like, I can't drive anymore, but we made it. So everybody go check out Thalia on Instagram and all her other platforms. Thank you so much.